I sat quietly in the back row, my dress still damp from the Georgia heat, watching the camera flash around my family like it exist. Laughter echoed off the oak tree, champagne glasses clinked, and no one noticed I hadn't been asked for a single. Then I heard her, my daughter-in-law, low, sharp, and deliberate. Erase her from every picture. Not skip, not crop. Erase. After hosting their engagement dinner, after paying for Ethan's college, after raising him alone when his father walked, I was now a blemish to be edited. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The wedding venue was a portrait of Southern charm, the kind Clara had seen 100 times in the postcards of Savannah. Oak trees draped with Spanish moss, a polished wooden floor reflecting the soft glow of vintage chandeliers. The air was thick with, but the energy was thick with something else, tension. Clara sat quietly in the back, a few feet from the small crowd of family and friends gathering for the post-ceremony photograph. She could hear the laughter, the chatter, the clicking of the camera, but none of it. It felt like a show, a carefully constructed performance. And Rachel was the director. Her daughter-in-law was speaking to the photographer, Tom Alvarez. Clara's eyes narrowed instinctively at the sharp tone of Rachel's voice, though the words themselves were soft, almost like a whisper. Still, Clara could hear them clearly from where she sat, her gaze fixed on the ground, pretending to study her shoes, trying to keep her face impassive. Erase her from every picture, Rachel said. I don't care what you have to do. Just make sure she's not in any of them. She doesn't belong here. Clara's breath caught. Her chest tightened, but she kept her hands folded in her lap, gripping her fingers together to hold the shaking at bay. Tom, the photographer, shifted uncomfortably. She could tell by the way he fiddled with his camera, avoiding eye contact. He didn't say anything at first, but then the words slipped out quietly. Are you sure? Well, that's a pretty big ask. Rachel's smile tightened, a cold, calculated expression. I'm sure. I'm paying you, aren't I? The photographer hesitated, then nodded. But Clara could see it in his eyes, the discomfort, the guilt. He was a man who valued his craft. He didn't want to be complicit in this erasure. But the money, the pressure, it all made him reluctant to speak up. Clara swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. She forced herself to breathe slowly. She shouldn't have to hear this. She shouldn't have to feel this. It was a decision Rachel had, a decision to erase her from her own family's memory, like a stain that didn't belong in the perfect image of their lives. The hurt was a dull throb, sinking deeper with each passing moment. Lily, sitting next to her, sensed it before Clara could even stop it. The young girl's fingers brushed against, a silent understanding passing. Lily's hand squeezed Clara's gently, the way she always did when she knew her grandmother was holding back tears. Ethan, oblivious, was lost in conversation with a friend at the far end of the room. His back was to them, his voice far too light for the heaviness that hung in the air. He didn't hear, he didn't see. And Clara had learned long ago to let him remain. It was easier that way, for both of them. Without a word, Clara stood, gathering her purse and slowly making her way toward the back exit. The last thing she wanted was to be seen crying, especially by her son, especially by Rachel. Outside, the humid air hit her like a wall. She stepped into the garden, where the soft rustling of the oak leaves did little to quiet the storm inside her. Her hand trembled as she wiped away a tear, then another. But there was no stopping them. It wasn't just about the photos. It wasn't just about Rachel's cruel demand. It was the years of small cuts, the growing distance between her and the family she once knew. She'd felt it all building to this moment, but it still hurt. All the same. You can erase me from photos, not from truth. The words whispered from her own mind, as if they had always been there, just waiting to surface. The truth could be hidden for a time, twisted and manipulated, but it would always remain. It would always be there, like a shadow in the light, impossible to ignore. And that truth, her truth, was not something Rachel could erase, no matter how many photos she altered, no matter how many times she tried to pretend Clara didn't exist. Clara closed her eyes, breathing in the thick southern air, the smell of magnolia blossoms sweet but heavy. She wiped her face one last time, straightening up. The worst part was that she wasn't even surprised. This had been coming for a long time. She took a deep breath, and when she turned back to the door, her eyes met Lily's through the window. The girl was watching her, her expression soft, sad. Clara gave her a small nod, a silent promise that she wasn't going anywhere. The night wasn't over yet, and Clara Clara wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The small photography studio smelled faintly of chemicals and dust, a subtle reminder of the decades that had passed since its opening. The walls, covered with black and white portraits of smiling families, newborns, and weddings, seemed to hold the weight of time itself. Clara stepped inside, her heels clicking softly on the wooden floor, the cool air conditioning a welcome relief from the oppressive heat outside. Tom Alvarez was behind his counter, his hands resting on a stack of photographs, but his eyes were fixed on Clara as she entered. He gave her a tight, uncomfortable smile, his expression more apologetic than welcoming. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said quietly, his voice laced with regret. "I didn't expect to see you so soon." Clara's gaze drifted around the room, settling on a series of portraits from the recent wedding. Her eyes flicked over the faces of her family members, searching for something, anything, that might tell her what Rachel had ordered. She didn't have to ask. Tom cleared his throat and motioned for her to sit across from him. He picked up his laptop and opened a folder, revealing raw, unedited files of the photos from the ceremony. Clara's heart lurched in her chest. There she was, standing in the background, smiling faintly, her arm wrapped around Lily's shoulder. The frame was filled with joy, with the love she'd always felt for her family, even when it wasn't always written kind. And yet, in that image, she could feel Rachel's absence, her presence looming just beneath the surface like a cloud hanging over everything. She wanted me to erase you," Tom said, the words falling heavy between them. "From every picture, all of them. I couldn't do it. Mrs. K. Mitchell, I'm not that kind of photographer." Clara's eyes hardened, but she didn't speak. She couldn't speak. The words were lodged in her throat, a bitter mix of anger and sadness that threatened to swallow her whole. "I don't alter the truth," Tom continued, his voice low and strained. "But I know she'll try to go somewhere else. She's already talking about paying someone to do it. If you want to keep the original files, I'll hold on to them for you. Safe, private." He pulled a thumb drive from the drawer and set it on the table. Clara reached out and took it, her fingers brushing against his. The rawness of the moment hit her harder than she expected, a quiet weight that seemed to press down on her chest. She nodded, grateful but shaken. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft, unsteady. It was a small word, but it carried the weight of something much larger: trust, desperation, survival. Thank you." Tom didn't say anything for a moment, his eyes lingering. He seemed like he wanted to say more, but the words never. Instead, he just sat there, looking at her with something between sympathy and guilt, like he knew that Rachel's cruelty wasn't the end of the but just another chapter. Clara's fingers tightened around the thumb drive, her nails pressing into the plastic. "You did the right thing, Tom," she said, her voice more firm now, a quiet strength emerging in the face of the storm. "No one can erase the truth, not even her." Tom nodded but didn't look at her directly. His gaze was fixed on the screen, where the unaltered images of her family flickered, the ones that would never be erased, no matter how much Rachel wanted them to be. Outside the studio, the world seemed to spin on without them, oblivious to the quiet war being fought behind the closed doors. But Clara wasn't oblivious. She knew what she had to do. This wasn't just about photos. It was about more than that. It was about dignity, about taking back what had been stolen piece by piece for years. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. She looked up, startled, and saw Lily standing in the doorway. The girl's eyes were wide with concern, her brow furrowed. "Grandma?" Lily's voice was tentative, but there was a quiet strength in it, just like her grandmother. "Are you okay?" Clara nodded, managing a small smile, her heart clenched at the sight of her granddaughter standing there, the bright eyes full of determination. Lily was growing up too fast, but Clara was grateful for the fire in her that burned so brightly, so fierce. Lily stepped inside, closing the door behind her. She walked over to Clara and wrapped her arms around, a simple gesture that meant everything. "We'll fight this," Lily said softly, her voice unwavering. "I'll help you, Grandma. We won't let her get away with it." Clara pulled back slightly to look at her, her heart swelling with pride. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "We'll fight, and we'll win, together." Lily smiled, and Clara couldn't help but think, maybe, just maybe, this was the turning. The moment everything began to shift. As they walked out of the studio together, Clara's grip on the thumb drive tightened. The path ahead would be hard, but it was one she wasn't going to walk alone, and for the first time in a long while, the weight in her chest felt just a little lighter. This fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara had just finished sorting through the mail, bills, advertisement, and a stack of newsletters from the local garden club. When the letter arrived, it was thick, official looking, the kind that signaled the start of something that couldn't be undone. She didn't have to open it. She knew what it would say. The envelope was addressed to her, but the name at the top was not her own. Clara Mitchell, petitioner, Ethan Mitchell, and Rachel Mitchell. Her breath caught in her throat. It felt like a punch to the gut, though she had braced herself for this moment. After all, Rachel had shown her, but the stark formality of it, the cold weight of the words, was another thing entirely. Mentally unfit, the petition, unable to manage personal affairs following a mild stroke. Rachel's words, not her own, written in a perfect, calculated hand. There it was, their weapon. The legal claim that would strip her of control, of dignity, of everything she had spent years building. Clara sank into the armchair by the window, the envelope heavy, the sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting a soft glow over the room, but it felt distant, almost unreal. She stared at the words, trying to wrap her mind around them, but the more she looked, the less sense it made. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone. She didn't call Ethan. He wasn't the one who would help. Not now. Not anymore. He was too deep in Rachel's grip, his silence louder than any words he could have spoken. No. She needed someone who understood the quiet wars that were fought behind closed doors, someone who could see through the lies. Clara dialed Naomi Green's number. The line clicked, before the voice on the other end even had time to say, "Hello." Naomi had a way of making you feel as if she had been expecting your call, as though she were waiting for just this moment. "Clara," Naomi said, her voice smooth but firm, the calm in it a stark contrast to Clara's swirling thoughts. "What's happened?" Clara hesitated, but the words spilled out. "Rachel's filed a petition for guardianship. She's claiming I'm mentally unfit, that I can't make my own decisions after the stroke." A long silence followed. Naomi, ever the professional, took it in stride, but Clara could hear the shift in her. A slow exhale, the softest of sound, like a storm waiting to break. "This isn't about care," Naomi finally said. "This is about control. Rachel wants what's yours. Ethan, too. He's complicit by his silence. You know that." Clara's grip tightened on the phone, her knuckles white. She'd always known Rachel was calculated, but hearing it out loud, hearing Naomi say it, made something shift inside her. "Control," Clara murmured. "They think they can just take everything." "They do," Naomi replied, blunt and unflinching. "But they're wrong. We'll fight this." Clara swallowed, the weight of Naomi's words sinking in. "I don't know what I'll do if I lose this," she whispered, the vulnerability in her voice a stark contrast to the walls she had so carefully built around. Naomi was quiet for a moment, then said, "We have evidence, Clara. Don't forget that." Clara closed her eyes, the memories of the photos, the unaltered flashing before her. The thumb drive still rested in her bag, a small piece of power in a world that was quickly slipping out of her control. The truth was on her side, no matter how much Rachel twisted and turned. "I'll bring everything," Clara said, her voice steady now. "We'll give them evidence. If they want to take me to court, we'll fight. We'll fight for everything. I'll prepare the paperwork," Naomi said. "You don't need to worry about the rest. We're not letting them take you down, Clara. Not this time." After hanging up, Clara sat there for a long moment, staring at the petition, the weight of it still pressed on her chest. But there was something else too. Something quieter, but stronger. Determination. A resolve she hadn't known. The front door creaked open, and Martha entered, her sharp eyes immediately spotting the envelope in Clara's hand. "What's this?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous, the way it always got when she knew something wasn't right. "Rachel's at it again, isn't she?" Clara didn't need to say anything. Martha's gaze flicked to the petition, then back to Clara's face. Her lips thinned and the fire in her eyes flared. "They want to take you to court?" Martha asked, though it wasn't really a question. "To take control of your life? Over my dead body." Clara felt her heart tighten at the fierceness in Martha's voice. The old woman was like family, a friend who had been there through the good times and the bad. She had always stood by Clara, even when the world seemed to crumble around them. "I'll fight," Clara said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Martha snorted. "I know you will, Clara, and I'll be right there beside you." Clara's gaze shifted back to the storm was just beginning, but she wasn't going down without a fight. Not this time. As Martha sat beside her, both women staring at the damning paper on, Clara whispered the words that had been simmering inside her all after. "If they want court, they'll get it, and we'll show them the truth." The air in the room felt heavier now, but Clara couldn't help the quiet smile that tugged at the corner of her lips. She wasn't alone in this fight. Not anymore. The battle was just beginning. The dining room table was cluttered with piles of yellow deeds, medical evaluation, and old photographs of family gatherings. Clara had spent the last few days in a haze of paperwork, sorting through decades of her life. She had gathered her most precious record, everything she could find that could prove the life she had built, the life she still had the right to control. Each document she stacked in neat piles, her hands moving with an unhurried precision that only came with years of practice. The weight of each page felt heavy, like the echoes of a lifetime spent building something that was now threatened by her own blood. She stared down at the deed, the will, and the medical evaluation, each one a small affirmation of her right to remain independent, to live without the interference of Rachel or anyone else. Naomi's voice cut through the stillness, her calm authority filling the room. Clara, we need to think about the trust transfer. It's not just about keeping Rachel from controlling your affairs. We need to protect your asset. This isn't just probate, it's exploitation. Clara's fingers hovered over the page, feeling the weight of Naomi's words. She had known it, of course, but hearing it said aloud made it feel more real, more pressing. Rachel had always been about control. Now she was trying to take the last vestiges of Clara's life, her house, her saving, her legacy. She couldn't let that happen. I've arranged for a trust transfer, Naomi continued, her voice clear and measured. You can't let Rachel control the asset. We'll move them into a trust you control. That way, if this does go to court, we have a firm foundation. She won't be able to access any of it. Clara nodded slowly. She had worked for decades to secure her family's future. The thought that someone, especially Rachel, could steal it away from her without even blinking made her blood boil. But she couldn't afford to get lost in anger. Not now. She had to be calm, collected. I'm ready, Clara said, her voice steady. She reached for the next pile of documents, the medical evaluations from her last checkup. The stroke had been mild, as the petition claimed, but Clara was far from mentally unfit. She knew her mind better than anyone else did, and it was still sharp, still clear. She wasn't going to let Rachel dictate her life, no matter how many false accusations she made. Across the room, Lily stood at the window, watching her grandmother with wide eyes. The girl's face had matured in the last few, the weight of the battle already visible in the way she held herself, quiet but resolute. She had always been Clara's most loyal ally, and now, more than ever, she seemed to understand the stakes. Can I help? Lily's voice was soft, but Clara saw the determination in her face. She had seen it in her granddaughter from the moment Rachel had made her cruel demand about the photos. Clara had never been prouder of Lily than she was right now. Clara smiled gently, the edge of her heartache softened by the girl's presence. You already are helping, sweetheart. Lily stepped forward, pulling a chair beside Clara's. She began to carefully flip through the papers, pausing at each one, making sure everything. Clara had raised her to be meticulous, sharp-eyed and thoughtful, and it was moments like this that made Clara realize how far Lily had come. As Clara filed each document into a leather binder, she felt the weight of everything coming together. The thumb drive containing Tom's unaltered photos of the wedding was tucked into the binder, a silent but powerful piece of evidence. She ran her fingers over it as she closed the binder, the cold, smooth plastic a reminder of the fight ahead. The doorbell rang, cutting through the quiet hum of the house. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She didn't need to ask who it was. She had been expecting Tom's delivery. It was time to secure the final piece. Lily stood and went to answer the. Clara watched her granddaughter's silhouette through the doorway, her movements steady and confident. This was more than a legal battle. It was a fight for everything that mattered. It was about dignity, about family, about the truth that no one could erase. Tom stood on the porch, holding a small package. He handed it to Lily with a quick nod, his face tired but resolute. She took the package, bringing it back to the table. Clara opened it carefully, her fingers trembling as she slid the contents free. Inside were the digital copies of the photos, the unaltered images standing in the background, proudly watching her family. Clara's heart ached as she stared at the raw honesty of them, a stark contrast to the lies Rachel had tried to paint. These were the pictures that Rachel had wanted to erase, the proof that Clara was still a part of the family, no matter how much Rachel tried to pretend otherwise. Clara ran her fingers over the edges of the prints, the tangible proof of her presence in a world that was trying to push her out. Thank you, Tom, she whispered to no one in particular, the weight of his gesture sinking in. He had stood by her, had done what was right, even when it would have been easier to look the other way. Naomi's words echoed in her mind again, louder now than ever. This isn't just probate, it's exploitation. Clara closed the binder with a definitive snap, the sound almost final. She was ready. Whatever happened next, she had the truth on her side, and she wasn't going to let anyone, least of all Rachel, take that away from her. Lily looked at her grandmother, her eyes fierce. "We're not going to let them win, Grandma." Clara nodded, steady and resolute. "No, we're not." The storm was coming, but Clara was ready. The battle for her life, her family, and her legacy had only just begun, and she wasn't backing down now. The courtroom was colder than Clara expected. The air conditioning hummed low above them, a mechanical drone that did nothing to calm the storm that churned within her. It was a familiar space, old, high ceiling, lined with oak panels and framed portraits of stern-faced judges long past. But today, the room felt like a battlefield, the polished wood and heavy curtains hiding the sharp, unseen blades. Rachel sat with her lawyer her posture stiff, her eyes focused straight ahead. Clara glanced at her briefly, noting the tightness of Rachel's jaw, the forced smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was playing the role of concerned daughter-in-law to perfection, clutching a folder of documents as if they were the key to her righteousness. Clara could feel the weight of her own folder in her lap, the binder heavy with evidence, medical records, the will, the deeds, and of course, Tom's thumb drive with the unaltered wedding photo. Across the room, Naomi sat calmly at the attorney's desk, her hands folded in front of her. Naomi's presence reassuring, even in the midst of the tension that hung thick in the air. She had prepared them for this moment, for what was to come. The judge entered, and the room went silent. Judge Wallace Kemp was an older man, his face lined with years of experience and skepticism. His eyes moved slowly over the room, taking in the players before him, the worried look on Rachel's face, the calm demeanor of the determined strength Clara tried to keep hidden behind her composed exterior. "Court is now in session," the judge announced, his voice gravelly. Clara took a deep breath. This was it. Rachel's knee stood first, all smooth words and polished gesture. "Your Honor, we are here today because Clara Mitchell has shown signs of cognitive decline. Following a mild stroke, she has become increasingly confused and unable to make decisions for herself. My client, Rachel Mitchell, is seeking guardianship to ensure her well-being and manage her financial affairs." Rachel's gaze flicked toward Clara briefly, her eyes glimmering with a false sweetness that made Clara's blood run cold. This was the performance of a lifetime, the concerned daughter-in-law playing her part to perfection. Naomi stood without hesitation, her voice firm but controlled as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, we disagree with this petition. Clara Mitchell is of sound mind and body. She has provided medical evidence from her physician confirming her full recovery from the stroke. There is no indication that she is in any way unfit to manage her affairs." She motioned to Clara's folder, then turned to the court's audience. "Furthermore, we have evidence that the actions of Rachel Mitchell are not rooted in concern, but rather in a desire for control over Clara's financial assets." Naomi pulled a photograph from Clara's binder and handed it to the court clerk, who passed it to the judge. Clara's stomach tightened. She knew what was coming. The judge glanced down at the image, his brow furrowing slightly. It was the unaltered wedding photograph. Clara stood in the background, proudly watching the family, a faint but unmistakable smile on her face. She was there. She was real. And Rachel's attempts to erase her from those memories were now laid bare. Naomi spoke again, her voice unwavering. "This photo, which Rachel Mitchell tried to have erased from the wedding album, serves as a clear indicator of her intention. She doesn't just want guardianship, she wants control over Clara's life and legacy, a control that extends to her family's memory. This is not about care, it's about exploitation." Clara's heart beat heavily in her chest as she looked over at Rachel. Her daughter-in-law's face had gone pale, her eyes darting around the room, desperate to regain control of the narrative. But the truth was already out. It had been exposed, laid bare for all to see. Judge Kemp adjusted his glasses and set the photograph down. He looked back at Rachel's, his expression stern. "You're telling me that your client's concern is for her mother-in-law's well-being, yet she attempted to have her erased from photographs? This doesn't sit well." Rachel's lawyer sputtered, trying to salvage the narrative. "Your Honor, that was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Rachel only wanted to keep the pictures looking." The judge raised his hand, silencing. "I'm not interested in excuses. I'm interested in facts." The room grew still as the judge turned his gaze back to Rachel, then Clara. His expression softened for just a moment, then returned to its usual severity. I will request a forensic review of the financials. I want to know where Clara's money has been spent, and if any of it has been improperly handled. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Naomi had anticipated this. She had known it was coming. The court will convene in 2 weeks, Judge Kemp continued. This hearing will be focused on financial exploitation, not guardianship. We'll see if the petition holds any weight after the forensic. The hammer of justice came down with a sharp clack as the gavel echoed through the room. Clara sat still, the words sinking in slowly. The case had shifted. What had started as a guardianship hearing, aimed at stripping her of her independence, had now become an investigation into financial exploitation. Rachel's carefully orchestrated play had backfired. She met Naomi's eyes, and for the first time since entering the room, Clara allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't over. It was far from over. As the room began to empty, Rachel's glare met Clara's for a split second. There was no doubt in her eyes now. No more attempts at feigned concern. Rachel knew what this meant, and so did Clara. The storm was coming, and this time, Rachel wouldn't be able to hide behind her lies. Clara stood up, her back straight, the binder of evidence firmly. She wasn't going to let anyone erase her. Not now. Not ever. The real battle had just begun. The days following the hearing were as if the air itself held its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Clara spent hours going through old bank statements and documents with Naomi, her eyes scanning the numbers, her mind working through the patterns of a lifetime. Naomi had anticipated the forensic audit. She knew that Rachel's attempts to control Clara's finances would reveal far more than just a desire to seize guardianship. The request for a financial review wasn't just a tactic. It was the beginning of unraveling the very web Rachel had woven around Clara's life. The forensic auditor arrived with a heavy briefcase filled with folders of financial records, meticulously organized and ready for scrutiny. Naomi sat across the table from Clara, her expression focused but calm. The auditor, a young man with glasses and a sharp suit, spread out the papers before them, like a chess player readying for the first move. Your Honor's order to investigate the finances has yielded some concerning results, the auditor said, his voice low but precise. He pushed a few pages forward, pointing to a chart. Rachel Mitchell has been withdrawing substantial amounts from the joint accounts she shares with Clara. The spending patterns are erratic and excessive, much of it directed toward luxury purchases, travel, and entertainment. Clara's stomach tightened as she leaned forward, her gaze fixed on the numbers. Rachel had been spending money like water, money Clara had worked for, money she had saved, money that was meant for her and Lily, for her future. Let me guess, Clara whispered, her voice sharp. There's no record of where the money actually went, is there? The auditor looked up, his face grim. No. Most of the spending is unaccounted for. We're still tracing some of the transaction, but it's clear. There's a pattern of overspending that borders on fraudulent. Clara didn't need to hear more. She had seen enough. It's always been about control, she said quietly. The words felt heavy as they left her lips, like a truth she had always known but never fully understood until now. Rachel hadn't just wanted to erase Clara from the family photo. She'd wanted to erase Clara's financial independence. Naomi nodded, flipping through the papers with practiced precision. Rachel thought she could hide her tracks. But you're right. She's been reckless. This is no accident. Clara leaned back in her mind working quickly, pulling the threads of the last few years into focus. She remembered the subtle comments Rachel had made about money, the casual mentions of shopping sprees, of the lavish trips she had planned for herself, but always with a casual tone, as if it were nothing. All of it now made sense. Rachel had been using Clara's funds to finance a life of luxury, all the while portraying herself as the dutiful daughter-in-law. Martha had stopped by earlier that day, bringing a pie and a scowl. Clara hadn't even needed to ask. Martha was already on the case, her sharp instincts honed by years of friendship and loyalty. That girl, Martha had muttered, shaking her head. She dug her own grave, didn't she? Clara smiled faintly at the memory of Martha's words. It was a harsh thing to say, but in a way, it was true. Rachel's greed and arrogance had led her to this moment. She had overplayed her hand, and now, it was all coming. The room felt heavier with the realization that Rachel's plan was collapsing, piece by piece. But there was more to do. The financial evidence had to be gathered, organized, and presented. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel's next move was just around the corner. Do we have everything we need? Clara asked Naomi, her voice firm. Naomi paused for a moment before answering, her eyes flicking to the stack of papers before her. We have most of it, but there's more to come. Tom's been keeping track of the unedited photos, and I'm expecting him to deliver more soon. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, cutting through the tension that had filled the room. Lily, who had been silently sitting in the corner, looked up quickly. I'll get it, she said, her voice calm despite the storm brewing. Moments later, Lily returned with a familiar face. Tom Alvarez, his camera bag slung over his shoulder, a solemn expression on his face. He placed a small envelope on the table before Clara, the weight of it undeniable. More photos, Tom said quietly, his voice low, as though he were afraid to disturb the fragile calm in the room. I thought you might need these. Clara opened the envelope with a slow, steady hand, her heart pounding. Inside were the photos, raw, unedited images of the wedding, the moments that Rachel had tried to erase, the moments where Clara stood proudly in the background. Tom had captured everything, the truth preserved in each frame. Clara ran her fingers over the edges of the photos, her heart heavy with the realization of just how much Rachel had tried to destroy. But the truth was there, unaltered. It could not be erased. Erase me? Clara whispered, her voice low but fierce. She erased her. Naomi glanced over at her, the fire in Clara's eyes unmistakable. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. The pieces were falling into place, and Rachel had no idea what. Clara's heart beat with a new sense of purpose. The battle was shifting in her favor, but she wasn't about to let. Not until the truth was out in the open, and Rachel's reign of control and deceit exposed for everyone. The storm was far from over, but Clara was ready. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the house as Clara sat at the kitchen table. The papers from the forensic audit spread out before her. Naomi had left for the day, promising to follow up with the probate investigator, Officer Ruiz. Lily had disappeared upstairs to study, leaving Clara in the quiet of her own thoughts. The front door creaked open with a faint groan, and Clara didn't need to look up to know who it was. The sound was too familiar, the purposeful, heavy steps unmistakable. Rachel had come. Clara's hand froze over the document. She had expected this, even anticipated. The more Rachel's plans fell apart, the more desperate she would become. Rachel had already made it clear that she wasn't the type to back down, no matter the cost. Clara stood slowly, her bones aching, her back straight with a quiet resolve. She heard Rachel's heels click against the hardwood floor as she approached, her presence heavy with intent. The door slammed shut with a sharp thud behind her. Clara! Rachel's voice rang out, sweet, sugary, but underneath, something far colder, like a snake hiding beneath a bed of roses. We need to talk. Clara didn't flinch. She had faced much worse in her life than Rachel's empty threats. Slowly, she turned to face her daughter-in-law, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable. Rachel stood in the entryway, arms crossed, her eyes hard. I don't know what game you think you're playing, she said, her voice low, barely containing the venom under. But I'm warning you, stop now before it gets worse. Clara's lips barely parted, her voice calm but unwavering. What's your next move, Rachel? More lies? More manipulation? Rachel's eyes flashed with something dark, something dangerous. You think you've won? You think this is over? She stepped forward, her heels clicking louder with every step. If you don't step aside, I'll make sure you regret it. I'll make sure Lily never has to see you again. You'll have nothing, Clara. Nothing. Clara didn't react to the threat of her granddaughter. She simply stood there, silent, still. She'd heard the worst from Rachel before. She knew how to navigate these. But then Rachel's next words made her blood run. You're going to lose everything. And when I'm done, you'll be nothing but a distant memory. Your son will never forgive you. He'll see it's all your fault. You'll die alone. Clara felt the familiar pain in her chest. It wasn't new. Rachel's words had always been a weapon, sharp and designed to pierce the heart. But Clara was not the same woman she had been when Rachel first entered their lives. She wasn't the quiet, submissive woman who had let others control. Not anymore. She exhaled, her voice low but steady. Every word you spit strengthens. Every lie you tell only sharpens my resolve. Do you really think you can break me with threats? Clara's eyes locked onto Rachel's, unwavering. You've already shown your true colors, and I'm not going anywhere. Rachel sneered, a flicker of frustration crossing her face, but it was gone before it could settle. She turned abruptly, her anger crackling in the air, and Clara felt a fleeting sense of triumph. This time, she wasn't going to let Rachel, not in any way. But as Rachel walked toward the door, she paused, one hand resting on the doorknob. "You don't get to decide this, Clara," she said, her voice sharp with finality. "You've made this personal. Now I'll make it my personal mission to finish what I started. You'll regret crossing me." The door slammed behind Rachel with the force of a storm. Clara's heart raced, but her body remained still. The air in the room seemed to thicken, like it was holding its breath, waiting. But Clara didn't feel fear. Not anymore. She felt something else. A growing sense of strength. Rachel's threats didn't shake her. They only solidified her resolve. Upstairs, Lily had been listening, but Clara didn't move to find her. She knew the girl had heard it all, knew the weight of the words that Rachel had just thrown at her. But Clara wouldn't allow Rachel's venom to poison the space they had worked so hard to reach. The moment Rachel left, Lily came down the stairs, her face pale, but her eyes were filled with, "I got it all," she said softly, holding up her phone. "I recorded everything." Clara's breath caught. She hadn't even realized Lily had been there, had been recording the conversation, but the quiet defiance in her granddaughter's eyes reassured her. Clara nodded, pride and gratitude mixing in her chest. "Good. That's good. Naomi will need it for the case." As Lily handed Clara the phone, the weight of the situation pressed in. Rachel's threats were only the beginning, but now, they had something that could tear through Rachel's lies like a blade through silk. Clara's phone buzzed in her pocket, the screen lighting up with a message. "I'm adding the recording to the case file. Officer Ruiz will file a report on Rachel's threat. We're going to use this." Clara's lips twitched in a small smile. "We'll use everything, everything." The battle had entered a new phase. Rachel's desperate words had only made it clearer. They weren't just fighting for Clara's independence, they were fighting for the truth. And that truth would win. Clara looked at Lily, her voice steady but full of purpose. "This fight isn't over. It's only just begun." And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt something more than just survival. She felt hope. The morning was quiet, the world outside still wrapped in the heavy, humid air of a southern summer. Clara sat by the kitchen window, the sunlight spilling across the table, where the papers from the previous day's audit were scattered in disarray. She hadn't slept much, her mind too full of the storm that was brewing, but there was something oddly peaceful about the stillness in the house now. It was the calm before the inevitable, the kind of silence that carried weight. Her phone buzzed against the countertop, the screen lighting up with a notification. Her stomach. The local paper had posted its morning edition online, and there, in the glaring headline, was the story she had been dreading, and yet, strangely, waiting for. "Elder exploitation scandal rocks, Savannah family." The words jumped out at her, vivid and unforgiving. Below the headline was an image of Clara, unedited, standing proud and strong in the background of a wedding photo, her hand on Lily's shoulder. She had not been erased from the narrative. Instead, she stood tall, her face a mixture of quiet dignity and quiet. Clara had never expected to see herself in the headlines like this, but there it was. The article detailed the financial abuse Clara had suffered at Rachel's hands, the unauthorized withdrawals, the excessive spending, the exploitation of trust, and of course, the photo. Rachel's attempt to erase her from family memories had failed spectacularly. The raw image of Clara in the background, just as she had been in life, now served as the centerpiece of a story that painted Rachel in the cruelest light imaginable. Clara let out a slow breath, her gaze lingering on the image of her. It wasn't the kind of attention she had ever wanted, but in a strange way, it felt like a. The truth was no longer a whisper in the shadows. It was out in the open, for everyone to see. She felt the weight of footsteps behind her. Lily entered the kitchen, her face pale but her eyes filled with something else. Something Clara hadn't seen in the girl's eyes before. Something deeper, something defiant. "Grandma, it's all over the news," Lily said, her voice quieter than. "Everyone is talking about." Clara nodded, not surprised. She had known it would spread fast. Savannah was a small town, and nothing could stay quiet for long when it. But it wasn't just the people gossiping that mattered. It was the court of public opinion, the one that Rachel couldn't control. "I saw the article," Lily continued. "There's a picture of you. I'm proud of you, Grandma. You've always been strong. But now everyone." Clara smiled at her, a slow, weary smile. "Yes, sweetheart, now they know." But Rachel? Rachel knew too. Clara could almost feel the fury that would have been boiling inside her daughter-in-law. She could see Rachel pacing in her house, her hands shaking as she tore through the paper. Clara didn't have to imagine how Rachel would react. She knew her well enough. She would be furious, humiliated. This wasn't just a private battle anymore. It was a war being fought on the public stage. As if on cue, the doorbell rang, sharp and intrusive. Lily's head turned, and she gave Clara a questioning glance. Clara nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Lily opened the door, and moments later, Ethan stepped inside, his eyes darting nervously. He wasn't wearing his usual easygoing smile. Instead, his face was tight, drawn, as if he had aged years in just a few days. He hadn't wanted to be part of this battle. He had never stood up to Rachel, but now, there he was, forced to face the consequences of his silence. I saw the article," Ethan said, rubbing his hand over his face. "Mom, she's going crazy. She says you've ruined everything." Clara didn't look up from the table. She could feel his discomfort, the guilt radiating. She didn't want to fight with her son, but the distance between them had never been more palpable. "I didn't ruin anything," Clara replied, her voice steady. "Your mother did. She made her choices." Ethan's eyes flickered toward the paper on the table, then back to Clara. "But Mom, she's my mother, Clara. I don't know what to do. She's asking me to pick a side." Clara finally looked up, her gaze steady but laced with an emotion she couldn't hide. "You've already picked a side, Ethan. You just don't want to. But I can't keep protecting her. Not anymore." He winced, the weight of his silence pressing down on him like a leaden hand. The tension in the room was unbearable. "Don't," Clara continued, her voice softer. "Don't pretend this isn't happening. It's happening, and we all have to face it. You have to decide who you want to be." Ethan's eyes filled with confusion, regret, but still, no real resolve. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, he turned and left the room, the door closing softly behind. Clara stood slowly, her eyes flicking to the photo of herself in the paper once more. It was like looking at a ghost, a woman she had been, and a woman she was still becoming. This was the moment of reckoning, not just for Rachel, but for Ethan. The choices had already been made, and no amount of threats or guilt could change them. Lily stood beside her, quiet but resolute. "Grandma," she whispered, "they can't take you. Not anymore. You're the one who's right." Clara's lips parted, her voice soft but filled with more conviction than she had ever known. "The truth is louder than edits, sweetheart. Always." And as the world outside continued to spin, Clara felt something shift within her. She had nothing left to lose. The truth was out, and with it, she would stand tall. Rachel might have tried to erase her, but Clara Mitchell was here to stay. This fight was only just beginning. The knock on the door came early, just as the sun was beginning to push through the curtains, spilling light across the quiet house. Clara, still in her robe, felt the familiar weight in her chest, a mix of exhaustion and she had known this day would come, the day the storm of Rachel's deceit would break wide open, but nothing had prepared her for how it would feel when Lily opened the door, her expression blank, and stepped aside to let Officer Ruiz into the house. The probate investigator had been a quiet presence through it all, steady, diligent. He wasn't here for pleasantry. He had a job to do. "Morning, Mrs. Mitchell," Officer Ruiz said, his voice low but respectful. He handed Clara a thick envelope, its contents heavy with the weight of a decision already made. Clara took the envelope, her hands steady despite the rush of emotions threatening to rise. She tore it open, her eyes scanning the letter quickly. The grand jury had reached its decision. They had voted to indict Rachel Mitchell for attempted fraud, based on the forensic evidence of her misuse of Clara's funds. For a moment, Clara simply stared at the words, the reality of it sinking in like a stone settling deep water. It wasn't just the financial abuse that Rachel had committed, or the emotional manipulation. It was a pattern of a complete disregard for Clara's rights, and a cold, calculated plan to strip her of everything. The truth had been undeniable, the evidence irrefutable. But now, the battle was shifting. The fight for justice was no longer just about Clara's independence. It was about holding Rachel accountable, about making sure she couldn't hurt anyone else. "I can't believe it's really happening," Lily said, her voice a little tremulous but fierce. She stood in the doorway, arms folded, eyes narrowed in disbelief. "Mom, she's really going to pay for this." Clara looked up, meeting her granddaughter's eyes. "Yes, she is." Rachel's reputation, built on years of manipulation, was now hanging by a thread. The article in the paper had already shredded much, but an indictment? That was something else entirely. Clara could feel the momentum shifting. This was no longer just a family drama. It was a public reckoning, and Rachel had no control over it. I'll make sure the restitution claim is ready for trial. Naomi's voice cut through her thoughts. Calm, but with an edge of determination, she stood in the doorway now, her briefcase in hand, her expression unreadable but resolute. We'll make sure she pays back every penny. Clara nodded, her mind already working through the next steps. The legal battle was far from over, but the truth was on their side. I know you will, Naomi, Clara replied, her voice steady, but with a hard edge of certainty. But this isn't just about money. It's about everything she's taken from me, and everything she's tried to take from all of us. Naomi's gaze softened, just for a moment. She understood. This was more than finance. This was about dignity, about power, about the right to live a life free from manipulation. Clara's phone buzzed, breaking the quiet tension in the room. She picked it up and saw Tom's name on the. She answered it quickly, her heart beating a little faster, knowing what was. Clara, Tom said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of what he was about to say. I've completed the sworn statement. I've detailed everything. Rachel's demands, her behavior, the photos. It's all in there. I'll be submitting it to Naomi shortly. Clara felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. Thank you, Tom. You don't know how much this means. I do know, Clara. I do. His voice was quieter now, filled with something deep. We've all got your back. She hung up, her heart swelling with gratitude. The people around her, Naomi, Lily, Tom, even Officer Ruiz, had become something more than just allies. They had become her family in this fight. They were the ones standing with her when Rachel thought she could erase her. As the morning dragged on, the weight of the indictment settled in. Ethan had been subpoenaed as a witness. He hadn't come by that morning, hadn't called, but Clara knew he would have no choice but to tell. He would have to face the consequence of his silence. The guilt that had been gnawing at him was finally. Clara felt the sting of that distance between them, but she also knew that, in the end, Ethan had to make his own choices. And Rachel? Rachel had. Lily was quiet, sitting by the window now, her eyes staring out at the quiet. Clara watched her for a moment, and then spoke, her voice quiet, but full of resolve. You know, sweetheart, Clara said, her eyes narrowing slightly as she thought about the road ahead. No one can erase the truth. Not Rachel, not anyone. Lily nodded slowly, her eyes fierce. We've got it now. The truth. And nothing's gonna change that. Clara let out a slow breath, her gaze sweeping over the room. She had come so far. And now, Rachel's attempt to control, to manipulate, to destroy. It was all unraveling. Clara stood, steady. We've fought for this, Lily, and we're going to. The storm was still raging, but Clara could feel something different now. She was no longer just holding on, waiting for the worst. No, she was moving forward, determined to make sure that the truth would be the thing that people remembered. The fight was far from over, but Clara, she was ready. And Rachel? She had no idea what was. The courtroom was stifling, the air thick with tension as Clara took her seat in the witness stand. The bright lights above felt like a spotlight, intense and unforgiving, but she had long since learned how to stand under pressure. Her hands, folded neatly in her lap, were steady. The weight of everything that had led to this moment, everything Rachel had done, the lies she'd spun, was pushing her forward, fueling her. The gallery was packed with spectators, whispers weaving through the room as the trial began. Rachel sat across from her, her expression cool, but Clara could see the subtle tremor in her hands, the way she was gripping the edge of the table. Rachel's lawyer, tall, polished, and calculated, stood up, his posture commanding. He was already preparing his opening statement, positioning Rachel as the innocent protector, the dutiful daughter-in-law trying to safeguard her mother-in-law's well-being. Your Honor, the lawyer began, his voice smooth and practiced. We are here today because Clara Mitchell is a manipulative woman who has been controlling her son and granddaughter for years. Her mental state, following a mild stroke, has caused her to create a web of deceit and confusion, tricking those around her into believing she's still capable of making her own decision. Clara's pulse quickened. The lies were beginning again. The same manipulation, the same twisted narrative Rachel had always spun. The same one that had almost cost her everything. But she wasn't going to let it stand this time. Naomi rose from her seat, and the courtroom fell into a tense silence. She was calm, her every movement deliberate. Naomi wasn't just her lawyer, she was Clara's shield, the one who had kept her grounded through all the pain. Your Honor, Naomi began, her voice unwavering. What we have here is not a case of manipulation, but of exploitation. Clara Mitchell is fully aware of her mental and physical state, and we have the evidence to prove it. The prosecution's claim is based on nothing but fear and deflection. She held up a series of photographs, raw, unedited images of Clara, smiling, present at the wedding, every single detail untouched. The image of Clara, standing proudly in the background with Lily, was on full display. This is a woman who is not confused, who is not manipulated. This is a woman who's proud, whose presence is vital to her family. And this, Naomi said, her finger pointing to the image, is the reality that Rachel Mitchell wanted to erase. Clara's heart swelled with something fierce as the photo was displayed, showing her as she truly was, not an inconvenience to be swept aside, but a matriarch of her family. Naomi's words cut through the courtroom, each one striking at the falsehoods Rachel had built. Rachel's lawyer sputtered, trying to regain control. "This is irrelevant, Your Honor. The photographs don't change the fact that Clara Mitchell has manipulated her family for years." But Naomi wasn't done. "We also have more than just photographs, Your Honor," Naomi her voice gathering strength. "We have evidence of threats made against Clara. We have statements from a professional photographer who witnessed Rachel's demands to erase Clara from family memory. And most importantly, we have a recording." Clara's stomach dropped as Lily stood up, moving toward the audio equipment. The tension in the room was palpable as she clicked a button, and Rachel's voice filled the courtroom. "You think you've won? You think this is over? If you don't step aside, I'll make sure you regret it. I'll make sure Lily never has to see you again. You'll have nothing, Clara. Nothing." The words echoed in the room, and Clara could see Rachel's face go ashen. The courtroom was dead silent, the weight of Rachel's threat hanging in the air like smoke. "Those were Rachel Mitchell's words, Your Honor," Naomi said, her tone cutting through the shocked. "She did not come here out of concern for her mother-in-law. She came here to erase Clara, to take what she thought was rightfully hers." Rachel's lawyer stood up in a frantic mood, shaking his head. This is slander. It's..." But Judge Kemp silenced him with a swift motion of, "I've heard enough," Judge Kemp said, his voice stern and filled with disdain. "It seems to me that the only manipulation happening is on the part of the petitioner. Ms. Mitchell, I'll remind you that your actions will have consequences. The truth has a way of coming out, even when you try to hide it." Clara's chest tightened as she looked across the courtroom. Rachel was trembling, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape, her face a mixture of fury and desperation. But the more she fought, the more the truth was laid bare. The jury exchanged glances, their whispers low, but Clara could feel the shift. It was no longer a matter of Clara being the victim. It was Rachel who was now the one in the hot seat. Her lies, her manipulation, everything was coming undone. Tom, who had been sitting quietly beside Naomi, now stood, ready to tell. He stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "I was asked to erase Clara from the wedding photo," he said, making eye contact with the judge and the jury. "I refused. It wasn't about protecting her image, it was about protecting the truth. And I'm here today to tell you, without a doubt, that Clara was never the problem. She was always present, always a part of her family." The room fell into a heavy silence as Tom's words sank in. Rachel's reputation, already in tatters, was now completely destroyed. Clara sat there, still and steady, her heart pounding but with a sense of quiet triumph. The storm was breaking, and she had weathered it. Judge Kemp looked at Rachel one final time, his expression stern, as if the weight of the trial had already been decided. He didn't need to say much more. "Rachel Mitchell," he said coldly, "you are now painted as the abuser rather than the protector you claim to be." The gavel came down with a resounding crack, and Clara's heart lifted as she realized the truth had won. Rachel's lies could no longer hide behind her polished words. The tide had turned. The real battle had just begun, but Rachel was already losing. The night stretched long and heavy, the world outside Clara's window fading into the deep, humid darkness. The courtroom drama was over for now, but Clara's mind was still racing, sifting through the chaos and the raw emotions that had filled the air that day. The sounds of the trial, the lawyers' voices, the testimony, still echoed in her thoughts, reverberating like a drumbeat in the quiet of her. She sat at the kitchen table, the binder of documents in front of her, untouched since the day's end. It was a stark contrast to the weight she felt pressing down on her chest. Everything was hanging in the balance now. The jury had deliberated, and they would return tomorrow with their verdict. But tonight was the longest wait of her life. Lily sat across from her, her eyes darting nervously between Clara and the clock ticking softly on the wall. The young girl had always been the rock in the family, the one who could see through the fog of uncertainty. But even she seemed unsettled now. Her fingers tapped restlessly on the betraying the worry she was trying to hide. I wish we knew what they're thinking, Lily said softly, her voice betraying the tension she felt. What if they don't believe us? Clara reached across the table, her hand steady as she placed it over Lily's. The warmth of her granddaughter's touch, even now, was a steadying force for Clara. It reminded her of what they were fighting for. The truth had already been revealed. The evidence was inescapable. Rachel's lies were no longer enough to hold up under the weight of the facts. They will believe us, sweetheart, Clara said, her voice calm, even though the uncertainty still swirled in her own chest. The truth has already spoken louder than any of her lies. Lily nodded, her eyes bright but still clouded with worry. She wanted this as much as Clara did, wanted to believe that this battle would end in a way that was just. From the hallway, Clara heard the familiar shuffle of Martha's footsteps before the older woman appeared in the. Martha always had a way of cutting through the tension, of saying what needed to be said without unnecessary word. Well, I don't know about you two, Martha said, settling into the chair next to Clara, but I'm confident. The jury's heard everything they need to. They're not going to let Rachel off the hook this time. Clara looked at her friend, her steady gaze meeting Martha. The older woman had always been the one to stand beside her, even when the world seemed to be closing in. But tonight, something in Martha's voice resonated deeper than you. There was no doubt in her. You're right, Clara said quietly. We've done everything we've shown them the truth. Martha smiled, a slow, reassuring curve of her lips. Exactly, and Rachel's too busy panicking to think clear. She made her bed, and now she'll have to lie in it. The words were meant to reassure Clara, but they also reminded her of just how far they had come, how much had been sacrificed, how many years of manipulation and deception had led them to this moment. It had been a battle, one that Clara had been forced into, but one she would never have backed down from. Naomi's text buzzed on Clara's phone, the quiet vibration jolting Clara out of her thoughts. She glanced at the message, her heart skipping a beat at the sight of Naomi's name. Restitution paperwork is ready. We'll be prepared no matter the verdict. Clara's fingers lingered on the phone, a small smile tugging at her lips. Naomi had always been a step ahead, always anticipated come next. This wasn't over yet, but whatever the jury decided tomorrow, Clara knew they were ready. Lily squeezed her hand. I'm scared, Gran. Clara met her eyes, and in that moment she saw so much of herself in the fear, the uncertainty, the longing for everything to be right. But Clara was older, wiser now. She knew that fear was just another part. She had walked this road before, and she had come out stronger every time. I know, darling, Clara whispered, but we're going to be all right. Whatever happens tomorrow, we've already won. The room was quiet for a long while, the silence hanging thick between them, but Clara could feel it, the shift in the air. It was as if the earth itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final turn. She could almost feel the weight of the jury's decision pressing down on her shoulder. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, the answer to everything. But tonight, Clara felt a strange calmness settle over. This wasn't not yet, but it was the beginning of something new, the start of a life where Rachel's lies would no longer hold any power over. Outside, the night stretched on, the world slow and quiet beneath the stars. But Clara didn't feel the weight of it anymore. She wasn't alone, and the truth was on her side. Tomorrow, they would face whatever came next, but tonight, they would hold on to what they had, the truth. And that, Clara knew, was something no one could take away. The morning came too soon, the sun breaking through the curtains with the same oppressive heat that had marked every day for the past week. Clara sat at the kitchen table, the same binder of evidence from the trial now laid across, untouched, as though it were a relic of a battle that had already been fought. Lily had barely slept, the restless energy of the last few days still evident in her movement. She stood by the window, watching the street as if waiting for something to happen. The quiet tension between them was thick, the weight of what was coming too much to bear. Clara wasn't sure if she was more afraid of the jury's verdict or the silence that had settled between her and her son. Ethan hadn't come by that morning, just like the nights before. He hadn't spoken much during the trial, hadn't made his voice heard when it mattered most. But today, she knew that whatever happened in that courtroom would change everything. The sound of the doorbell broke the quiet, sharp, and sudden. Clara's heart lurched in her chest. She knew who it was without having to think. Grandma, Lily said softly, turning away from the window. They're here. Clara nodded but didn't rise. She wasn't ready yet. Not for the verdict. Not for the finality of it. The door opened and Naomi stepped into the room, her face unreadable but firm. She held the folded paper in her hands, the one they'd been waiting for all night. It's over, Naomi said quietly, sitting beside Clara. The jury has reached a decision. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Naomi, but couldn't bring herself to ask. Naomi unfolded the paper slowly, her eyes scanning the words. Rachel Mitchell is found guilty of attempted fraud. Clara's property rights are upheld. Rachel is barred from guardianship, and restitution is owed. The court also sees her attempts at manipulation for what they were. Clara's chest tightened with relief, but also with something deeper, something that felt like grief for the years lost, for the choices Rachel had. The truth had been recognized, but it had come at such a high cost. Across the room, Lily breathed out in a quiet, surprised exhale. Her face lit up with a soft smile, a mix of pride and disbelief, but Clara could see the tension in her shoulders begin to. Ethan entered the room a moment later, his face drawn, his eyes looking everywhere but at Clara. He hadn't spoken a word to her since the trial ended, and now, standing there in the doorway, the silence stretched between them like an impossible chasm. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his hands in his pocket, a shadow of guilt and uncertainty clinging to. But then, he took a step forward, his voice low. I'm sorry, he said quietly, barely meeting her eyes. I didn't know what to do. I should have said something earlier. Clara stood slowly, her movements steady, but the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The years of silence, of watching him shrink behind Rachel's shadow, had built to this one fragile point. I know you didn't, Ethan, she said softly, her voice steady but full of quiet sadness. But you have to decide who you want to be now. You can't hide behind her anymore. Ethan nodded, looking away as if the guilt weighed him down. There were no words left to be. Not for now. The distance between them had already been carved. Lily moved toward Clara and wrapped her arms around her tightly, a fierce, protective hug that seemed to say everything. Clara's heart softened as she held her granddaughter close, feeling the quiet strength that Lily always brought when the world seemed too heavy to bear. Grandma, Lily whispered, her voice shaking with, "We did it. You did it." Clara smiled, her fingers brushing over the back of Lily's head. "No, sweetheart, we did it." Her eyes moved across the room, catching sight of the photo still framed on the table, the image from the wedding, unedited, untouched. It had been there all along, a small symbol of everything she had fought for. The truth had always been in the background, no matter how hard Rachel had tried to erase it. Pictures tell the truth after all, Clara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, but her words ringing with the certainty of victory. Outside, the sun shone brightly, casting light across the room in sharp, clean angles. The storm had passed. The verdict was in, but Clara knew this was just the beginning of something else. A life no longer defined by Rachel's lies, a future where the truth would never be hidden again. The battle had been long, and the fight had changed her, but Clara was standing tall now, her hands steady on the life she had fought for, and nothing, not even Rachel, could take that away from her. Clara took a deep breath, finally feeling the weight lift from her chest. The storm was over. The truth had won. And tomorrow, she would begin again. The family gathered in Clara's living room later that week, the aftermath of the trial still hanging in the air like a cloud that had yet to dissipate. The house was filled with voices, but there was a strange, cautious energy. The weight of the verdict, the end of the battle, had left everyone a little subdued, each person still processing the reality of what had just unfolded. Clara sat at the center of it all, her eyes wandering to the framed photo of herself from the wedding, still perched on the mantelpiece. She had finally allowed herself to breathe again, to let go of the fear that had held her in its grip for so long. The storm was over. She had won, and Rachel had lost. But still, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was one last piece to. And then, there was a knock at the door. Tom Alvarez, the photographer, stood in the door, a large leather-bound wedding album in his hand. The light from the hallway spilled across his face, and Clara felt a quick rush of gratitude. He had been her quiet ally throughout it all, the one who had held on to the unaltered photos, the one who had refused to be manipulated by Rachel. Now, he was here to deliver the final proof. "Clara," Tom said, his voice calm, but with a hint of something else beneath it, something heavier, as though he were carrying a burden himself. "I've got the final album. Clara stood up slowly, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what she expected, but the significance of this moment, of this album, was almost overwhelming. It wasn't just about picture, it was about truth, about everything Rachel had tried to hide. Lily moved toward her grandmother, a sense of pride glowing in her eyes, but there was still a flicker of curiosity. She knew what had happened, of course. Everyone did. But this album? This was the final chapter. Tom handed the album to Clara, his fingers lingering on the edge of the cover for a "It's all in there," he said quietly. "Every photo, just as it was taken." Clara sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the first page. The wedding photos spilled out before her, vivid and full of life. Clara in the background, proud and unyielding, Lily by her side. There was no editing, no erasure. This was the truth of the day, a reflection of what had truly happened. She turned the page and then another, each photograph telling the same story: her present, her strength, her role in her family's life. But it was the last page that made her pause, her breath catching in her chest. There, on the very last page of the album, was something else entirely. It was a candid shot of Rachel, caught mid-command. The picture was slightly blurry, but it was unmistakable. Rachel's mouth was open, her face twisted in frustration. She was speaking to Tom, and from the angle of the shot it was clear what she was saying. "Erase her from the picture." Rachel's lips read, caught in a moment of vulnerability and desperation, the words forever immortalized in this one photograph. She was whispering it, yes, but the camera had captured the truth all the same. Gasps echoed from around the room. Ethan, standing across from Clara, froze in place. His eyes widened as he stepped closer, leaning in for a better look, his jaw slack with shock. Lily, standing beside him, looked up at her grandmother with pride, her face lighting up with understanding. "I didn't know," Ethan whispered, his voice low, as if the weight of the revelation had knocked the air out of him. She really tried to do that?" Clara, too stunned to speak at first, took a moment before responding. She had always known, of course. She had always known what Rachel had tried to do. But seeing it, hearing it, seeing Rachel's desperation caught in the act, was something entirely different. This wasn't just a fight for her property, her family. This was a fight for her place in the world, for the very truth of her existence. Lily's eyes gleamed as she glanced up at Clara. "Grandma, she can't hide anymore. It's all right here, in black and white." Clara's lips curved into a soft smile, a mixture of relief and vindication. She had fought this battle, and she had fought it well. Rachel's attempts at erasure had failed, forever captured in a photo that would never be erased. "Erase that," Clara whispered, her voice steady and full of quiet triumph. "You can't erase the truth, Rachel. Not anymore." The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of what had just been revealed settling in around them all. Ethan stood frozen, his expression still in shock, but Clara could see the shift in him. He wasn't looking at her with shame anymore. He was looking at her with something different, something like understanding. Tom cleared his throat softly. "I didn't want to be the one to bring this up, but I think you'll need to make copies of the. I've already sent one to Naomi, but..." Clara nodded. "I'll make sure it's kept safe. This," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "is more than just an album. It's the truth." Lily wrapped her arm around Clara, a gesture of support. But Clara could feel something inside her that she hadn't felt, a calm certainty that Rachel, for all her manipulation, could never take away what was rightfully. The room was still, but it was a quiet that felt different. The storm had passed, and the truth was standing, bold and unshakable. Outside, the sun was shining bright. Clara didn't feel the weight of it anymore. The truth had been captured, Rachel's lies, exposed. And as she looked at the photo, at Rachel, caught in the very act of trying to erase her, it was clear. The story had already been written. Now, Clara was the one who would write the next chapter. The house was still, the kind of stillness that only comes after a storm has passed and the dust has settled. Clara stood in the living room, her hand resting gently on the leather-bound album sitting safely on the shelf. It was no longer just a collection of, it was a declaration of truth, an unshakable testament to everything she had fought for. The album, its pages now immortalized in ink and light, held more than just memory. It held her victory. Outside, the sun hung low in the sky, casting a soft golden glow across the room. The oppressive heat of the past few weeks had begun to ease. The southern air now just warm enough to feel comforting, like a soft embrace after days of. Lily sat at the kitchen table, textbooks scattered in front of her, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. Every now and then she'd glance at the album, still sitting there in plain view, and Clara could see the pride in her granddaughter's eyes, the same pride Clara had felt for herself when the verdict had been delivered. The doorbell rang, its familiar sound breaking the quiet. Clara didn't need to look up to know who it was. Martha entered with her usual briskness, a warm pie in her hands and a look of satisfaction on her face. She placed it on the table with a small thud, her sharp eyes scanning the room as if checking for any lingering signs of the battle they had fought. But everything was calm now. The storm had passed, and peace had. "Thought you might need this," Martha said, her voice as steady as ever. "You look like you could use something sweet after all that mess." Clara smiled softly, a tired but contented smile. "Thank you, Martha. But I think I've had enough drama to last a lifetime. A slice of pie sounds just about right." Martha sat down across from her usual directness, softened by something else today, an understanding, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was the kind of silence that felt earned, that came with the realization that the hardest part was over. The soft clicking of Lily's pencil broke the quiet. Clara turned to find her granddaughter still hunched over her books, the concentration on her face unmistakable. But there was something else there too, something lighter, something freer. "Lily," Clara called gently, her voice quiet but strong. "You don't have to study so hard tonight. You've earned a break." Lily looked up, her eyes bright, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I know, Grandma," she said, pushing the books aside and stretching her arms out in dramatic "But you know, I think I'll just take a break from all. Maybe I'll go for a walk." Clara nodded, her eyes following her granddaughter as she stood and moved toward the door. "Sounds like a good idea, sweetheart. Take your time. Everything's going to be just fine now." Martha reached for a piece of pie, cutting it with careful precision. "So, what's next for you, Clara? You've got all your ducks in a row now." Clara looked at the album on the shelf, a quiet but steady resolve in her gaze. "Next? Well, I've got to make sure this truth is never forgotten. That's my job now. This," she said, gesturing toward the album, "isn't just about me. It's about making sure no one ever tries to erase us again. That's what this fight was for." The front door clicked shut softly as Lily stepped outside. Clara's gaze lingered on the open space where her granddaughter had been, a soft, protective feeling blooming in her chest. Her family was safe. That was what mattered most now. The door opened again, and Naomi stepped inside, her face calm but clearly focused. She had been working tirelessly on the restitution, ensuring that Rachel would be held accountable for every penny she had taken. The legal battle wasn't over yet, but Clara knew it was only a matter of time now. "Everything's in order," Naomi said, holding out a folder of finalized documents. "This is it, Clara. It's all sealed." Clara took the folder, her fingers grazing the edges of the page, and felt a deep sense of relief. It was finally over. Rachel's lies had been exposed, her control had been broken, and the truth had. Clara looked up at Naomi, her voice steady. "Safe," she whispered, the word carrying more weight than it had in a long time. "Safe, at last." Naomi nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Safe, Clara." Finally, the evening crept on, the soft light of the fading sun spilling across the room, and Clara allowed herself to breathe. The tension in her shoulders slowly released, and she leaned back into the chair, finally feeling the weight of everything lift from her chest. Lily returned shortly after, a peaceful look on her face, her shoulders relaxed as if the world had suddenly felt lighter. She sat down next to Clara, her hand brushing against her grandmother. "You're free now, Grandma," Lily said softly, a smile brightening her face. "They can't erase you anymore." Clara smiled, her hand resting gently on Lily. "No, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady. "They can't." The storm had passed. The quiet that followed was not one of uncertainty, but one of. The truth had been told, and that was all that mattered. In the distance, the world kept turning, but Clara no longer felt like she was being swept along by it. She was standing firm. She was safe. And nothing. The stage was set. The lights dimmed to a soft glow that wrapped around Clara like a warm embrace. The air in the conference hall buzzed with quiet conversation as attendees shuffled into their seats, the murmur of voices blending with the soft clinking of coffee cups and the rustling of brochures. Clara stood backstage, her fingers lightly gripping the podium that awaited her. She was calm now, as calm as she had been in those final moments of the trial when the truth had been laid bare. Today, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She wasn't just a grandmother or a woman fighting for what she had built over a lifetime. Today, she was speaking for all the others who had been silent, erased, or forgotten. She was standing here for the countless voices that had been buried under the weight of manipulation and control. For those who had been told they didn't. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle into her bones. The world had been watching. Rachel's world had been watching. And now, Clara had. She stepped up to the microphone, adjusting it with a steady hand before letting her gaze sweep across the room. She saw the faces, some familiar, others not, but all of them waiting for her to speak. She began softly, her voice steady but warm. I'm here today because I was nearly erased from my own family's history, erased from the memories of those I loved, for no other reason than control, to manipulate, to hold power over what was mine. The room fell quiet, every eye fixed on her. Clara felt the weight of their attention, but it didn't scare her any. This was her story to tell, and it was one of. They tried to erase me, but what they didn't realize is that the truth doesn't just disappear. You can try to remove a person from a photograph, but that doesn't change the fact that they were there. You can't erase what's real. You can't erase the love, the life, the dignity that someone carries with. Her eyes moved across the audience, her gaze steady, unyielding. She had lived the story she was about to share, and now it was her duty to make sure no one else would ever have to experience the same. I stood by my family. I gave them everything she continued. And when they tried to take that from me, I didn't just roll over. I fought back. Because dignity isn't something you can steal. It's something you uphold. The audience shifted in their seats, some nodding in quiet agreement, others simply taking in her word. Clara's heart beat strong in her. She was here, telling the story of how she had survived, how she had fought for her place in the world. I want you all to know that when they tried to erase me, I was already in every family photo, in every memory that couldn't be taken. And now, I stand before you, not as someone who is erased, but as someone who is still here, stronger than. Clara's voice grew stronger. She was no longer speaking just to the audience in front of her. She was speaking for everyone who had ever been silent, for everyone who had ever been made to feel invisible. Lily sat in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. Her hand rested on Martha's arm, both women leaning forward slightly, caught in the power of Clara's words. Ethan was there too, though he was seated further back, his face unreadable, but Clara could see the shift in him, the change in the way he was looking at her. For the first time, he saw her as she was meant to be seen, not as the woman he had been too afraid to stand up for, but as a force of nature in her own right. Clara paused, taking a breath before finishing, her voice calm but resolute. Respect is the only portrait that lasts. It doesn't matter how many pictures you try to change, how many lies you try to bury. The truth, our dignity, will always stand, unwavering, unmovable. A beat of silence hung in the air before the first applause broke out, a soft ripple of clapping that grew louder as more joined. Clara stood there, unmoving, letting the sound wash over. It wasn't just applause, it was recognition. It was the sound of people finally understanding what it meant to be. As she stepped down from the stage, Naomi met her at the bottom of the steps, a proud smile on her face. She had been with Clara every step of the way, helping to bring the truth to light, to ensure the story was told. You did it, Naomi said quietly, her eyes gleaming with admiration. Clara smiled, feeling the weight of the journey lift slightly. We did it. Lily rushed over to Clara, wrapping her arms around her grandmother in a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Clara hugged her back tightly, the love between them as solid as it had ever been. She pulled away and looked down at Lily, her voice steady, full of finality. They can't erase me anymore, sweetheart, she said, her voice a low promise. No one can. Outside, the world was still turning, but for Clara, it had shifted. The storm had passed, and now there was only the calm of knowing she was heard, and her truth, finally, could not be hidden. The applause still echoed in the hall behind her, but as Clara walked out the door, she felt the finality of everything. The battle had been fought, the truth had been declared, and when the album was shown, she wasn't erased. She was the story they couldn't hide.